All right, now we're going to jump into incrementality testing. All right. Can I slideshow this? Okay. Just start from a place where we've covered a few slides to kind of like get a running start into the topic. Remember, incrementality testing, there are two types of testing: holdout testing and scale testing. Okay, important to understand there are two basic types of testing within incrementality testing. Remember, the type of test that apply depends on the kind of media that you're deploying: prospecting versus retention, how far up the funnel it is, how far down the funnel it is it retained customers where you're testing a house file, or if it's third-party audiences where you're buying on Facebook or TikTok or whatever, right? What are the different approaches for testing? This is specifically for prospecting, geo-match market testing, platform split tests, and this is randomized control tests for CRM audiences. Okay, so this is for prospecting. Sorry about that. So these are the only two types of tests that apply for prospecting. I think we covered a version of this in the primer content. So here you can see that you can do both holdout and scale tests with geo. When you do split tests specifically, you can only do scale testing. There's one more line item that's supposed to be called the platform lift test, which we can do both holdout and scale tests. A slightly older version of the slide. I should update that. Okay. Now, within prospecting, again, we talk about, there is geo-match market testing, which is primarily using first-party data, and audience split testing, which is mostly using third-party data. So this is where you would do Facebook lift test, Roku lift test, Hulu lift test, GeoX from Google, and so all of those lift tests are kind of fall here. The split test, a lot of the platforms offer split testing functionality. Facebook offers a really sort of robust split testing functionality. So does Snap. So does a lot of like Google has a fantastic experiments function that allows you to split the traffic 90, 10, 80, 20, and test different versions of creative or execution on those audiences. So those are all what we call split tests. Okay, these are all third-party tools. When I say third-party, these are platform tools owned by the platforms. This is all usually first party. Okay, this is the kind of stuff that if you are a brand, you would do this. You would actually do a geo-match market test, right? And in terms of the quality of the test, we talked about that. The testing is the most highest form of causal estimate you can get. Media mix modeling is the next tier. Within testing, geo-match market tests are the most highest form of testing quality. So the results you get from a geo test usually have the highest caliber, right? Subject to a lot of things that you might, how you execute it and how it came out, all that stuff. But broadly speaking, academically speaking, geo-match market testing has the highest credibility and integrity for the results you get. Okay, so we covered this a little bit. Different workflows. Okay, now let's get into new content here. So we talked about the different steps in an incrementality testing workflow: test design, test flight, test reads. But you're really thinking about it from an objectives perspective. Start from objectives and end with new learnings agenda. So that's kind of the sandwich. And within the individual steps, there are multiple sub-steps, and some of those are pretty critical, like feasibility analysis and decision matrix are incredibly important, usually skipped in the process, and that leads to majority of the test failures, meaning that you ran a test, you didn't get a feasible test, you got a inconclusive read. Usually it's because you've not done a good job in feasibility analysis, and you've not thought through the decision matrix before you flighted the test. And one of the primary reasons it happens. If you figured this practice out for your own organization, you'll find that your ability to drive good testing outcomes will go up significantly. You will not all of a sudden go from getting maybe 1 out of 4 tests right, 1 out of 2 tests right, to getting 90% of your tests right, 80% of your tests right. Can have a significant difference in how successful the program itself, as the incrementality testing program at your organization, can be. Okay. All right. Now let's go into the specifics. Okay. Now, when you think of incrementality testing for prospecting, a very good mental model for you to have is this triangle. Okay. Now, why we'll talk about that in a second. Okay. Now, most platforms, let's take Facebook, because a lot of brands and agencies in the audience, the class would be buying some form of Facebook, probably broad audiences. There's probably a significant amount of investment there. Now, you can think of broad audiences as a class of audiences called modeled audiences. Now, what it means is that All platforms today, what they do is they take the data that we provide as brands of buy-side practitioners, the data we provide to platforms, which is the conversion pixels that we put on the site. They use that data to score their users, to identify which user is in market for your particular brand. And they use a variety of signals, similar brands, and what are visitors, what are users visiting, what sites are they visiting, what signals are they exhibiting, and they take all of their data sets to score the entire audience into like a pyramid. So what that means is you will have a small number of users who are very likely to buy your product, and then another group of users less likely, another group of users very much less likely, another group of users are kind of cold to your product. They don't really care about it, right? So you can think of it like a pyramid. Okay. Now, why is this meaningful? Is that whenever you buy media, whenever you buy broad audiences campaign or interest targeting campaign or a lookalike campaigns in various platforms, the targeting will go from top to bottom, which means they'll start targeting these audiences first and then target these audiences after. Okay, so therefore, the last click conversion rates will also go from best to, as you spend more and more dollars, usually your last click conversion rates will diminish. So this is kind of why you see diminishing return with modeled audiences on Facebook and TikTok and variety of other platforms, because you can think of it like this, and this exists in all channels. The saturation effects exist in all channels, but this mental model of how to think about audiences, makes a lot of the rest of the algorithmic approaches that you might apply later, the testing approaches you might apply later, all kind of becomes a little bit more clearer when you think of the audiences being modeled this particular way, right? So think of it as a pyramid. And the pyramid, top of the pyramid is your best audiences who are most likely to convert with you. And the bottom of the pyramid is least likely to convert with you, okay? Now, why is this also relevant is that incrementality will be opposite, right? Meaning that if you think of these at the tip as your retargeting audiences, these are audiences who already came to your site. They already checked out your products. They probably have something on the shopping cart already. So they're very likely to, or the likelihood to buy with you is much higher than somebody who doesn't know anything about you, right? So when you serve ads to these people, they are probably very effective, but they're also less incremental. Whereas the ads you apply here are probably not as effective, but very, very incremental, right? These are people who are not even considering your product. So when you serve ads to them and you change their behavior, all that media is working really hard for you, because it's now bringing audiences and turning them into customers, changing their behavior, which otherwise would not have happened without an ad. Whereas here, probably a lot of these customers would probably come back and convert with you anyway, because they're in the market for a specific product. Maybe you're in a market for running shoes, and you like a particular brand, and you're going to buy that brand because you have a lifestyle around running, and you have two or three brands that you're considering, and you're going to pick a brand for your own purposes. And then ads has a tendency to kind of change preferences slightly, but you probably have a strong bias towards buying the category already, right? Whereas if here, then maybe they're not even buying the category, right? They're probably like, you have to create the demand for your category and your product and then convert them. So the challenge from a measurement perspective is media will usually go this way, and therefore incrementality will get stronger as the buys progress. But as conversion rates will be the opposite. Conversion rates will kind of diminish as they go, right? And the ROI, the ROAS or the CPA is where they meet. So when those two curves meet, and there is a line in the sand where you say, well, beyond this, above this particular ROAS or all the audiences, maybe here you draw a line over here, all media above this works profitably for you. All media under this does not work profitably for you, or something like that. So that's the challenge, figuring out where those lines intersect, and at which point do these last click conversion rates become so terrible that you're not able to afford them anymore, right? And that's the challenge, okay, that we're usually solving with scale testing and diminishing returns or marginal returns calculations. Okay. All right. So different ways to test these audiences. The most high quality, established and accepted method for testing prospecting audiences, geo-match market testing. So what is geo-match market testing? The appeal for geo-match market testing is it can be done almost entirely using first-party data, right? Which is, if you're a brand, You don't have to rely on platforms providing you data sets or any tools. You can use your own transaction data for the most part. If you're most advertisers can, most marketers can. Some marketers in CPG, for example, cannot, but 95% of the different industries can do this. You can take data about your transactions and cut them by different geo grains. Could be in this particular case, I'm going to use a state level grain example, but you can also think of it as a DMA level grain, zip level grain, city level grain, and so on and so forth. There are basically 4 geo grains that you can cut data by: state, DMA, city, and zip. Okay. Now it turns out in the US that you can use, mostly you will get state, DMA, and zip. Those are the ones that will work for you. Whereas if you go to different countries around the world, the grains that work in those different countries change. Okay, the kind of mileage kind of varies. As an example, an extreme example, I would say that UK and Australia can only test with cities. There is no meaningful states. Like in the UK, there's Wales, England, and Ireland or whatever, Northern Ireland or whatever. Those are countries, not really states. And there is no real districts that you can really reasonably collate data across. So really, what happens is you have to test London and use cities as sort of the as the market grain. Similar situation with Australia. Whereas if you go to Germany, you can use states. There are 4 or 5 states that you can use that. In India, you can use states. So it depends on the country, the geo grain that works. In the US, we have DMA, which is a very popular geo grain, but states also very popular. State and DMA are very popular, very simple to think about. Simple is the wrong word, but much more understandable. The most sophisticated approaches come to zip level testing, which we're going to cover in this class. We're going to do a case study in this class. Okay. All right. So what does this mean? So what you do here with the geo-match market testing is basically take your data and you score your markets I'm just for the sake of sort of simplicity, I'm saying score the markets into tiers. What are your best markets, second best markets, third best markets into 5 or 6 tiers, right? Typically, it's a continuous score. It's not like a tier, but if for a mental model as to how to understand it, you can think of, hey, my Oregon and Maine are very similar markets for me, right? And Massachusetts and California are very similar markets for me. Nevada and South Carolina, similar markets for me, right? And where is New York? Is this New York? Yeah, it must be New York, right? So, this is New York, right? So New York, this is New York. Here, New York and Utah are very similar markets for me, and so on and so forth, right? So why this matters is that when you're doing geo-match market testing, you're finding matched markets, okay? As an example, California and Massachusetts. California typically tends to be a big market for most brands, right? You don't want to really test in California. You don't want to hold out California. You cannot scale in California. It's a giant market, a lot of population. It's pretty expensive. Whereas Massachusetts is more affordable. You can probably hold out Massachusetts. You can probably hold out Rhode Island. So look at Rhode Island, and for example, there's no matching markets here. Okay, imagine Rhode Island was matched with New York as an example, right? New York and Rhode Island were similar markets, and great. So you can use Rhode Island as a proxy for New York. Turn on, turn off media, scale into Rhode Island on Facebook or TikTok or whatever it is, and identify how those markets move or measure how those markets move. Use that as a proxy for what would happen if you did the same thing in New York. Okay, that's the whole purpose of doing match market testing. Is just identify big market and a small market, and use the small markets for testing, leave the big markets alone. The big markets will tend to be what I call anchor markets or control markets, okay? Sometimes we use that language kind of interchangeably, anchor and control. Anchor markets typically tend to be the big markets, the New York, the California, the Texas, the Florida, all these markets. Typically, there'll be about 10 markets that represent 70% of your total revenue. You want to leave those alone. You don't want to touch them. You don't want to work with them. You just want to use them as your anchor markets that represents the national whole. Then you want to take small markets like Rhode Island and Kentucky and other small markets and put them in cells and try different things with them. Turn off Facebook, double down on TikTok, or cut search spend or whatever it is, and figure out how those markets respond. Okay, that's the fundamental idea. Okay, now we're going to go into an example. What does this look like in the real, in the classroom example, what does this look like? So I'm going to take a bunch of anchor markets. You can see here, New York, California, Texas, Virginia, New Jersey. This is what I've identified as control markets. In this classroom example, this represents 60% of the total market share. Market share as in revenue, right? Let's say you're a Shopify shop, you go pull and reporting for the last quarter or something like that. You find that in the last quarter, these 5 markets contributed 60% of new customer acquisition revenue for you. Okay. Now, in these same markets, you figure out what are you spending. Okay. So more or less, this is equal to national spend. We're just taking a proportional amount. Yeah, you're spending roughly about some 2 point, what is it, $8 million, right? $2.8 million in these markets in this proportion, 45% on Google, let's call it search, 33% on Facebook prospecting, let's call it broad audiences, and similar broad audience type product on Snap. Okay, this is kind of what you're spending in these markets. And this is the revenue, $15.3 million represents 60% of total market share for you last month, let's say. Okay. Now, you take a test cell. In this particular case, cell A, these are the markets that have identified as test markets using a match market process. So the way you identify match markets is typically a statistical process. You use data to kind of identify how these markets are matched by seeing how they correlate with each other. And you can add a bunch of other metrics around all the features around market penetration and correlation and a bunch of other things to kind of figure out how closely correlated or similar looking those markets are. Okay, based on that analysis, I've identified that for these 5 markets together, Rhode Island, Nevada, South Carolina, Kentucky, Tennessee, these are the control markets. Oh, sorry, these are the test markets. Okay, on these test markets, you see that the media spend is similar, very similar proportions, obviously lesser media spend, but $1.8 million in revenue. So only 7% of market share, right? Much smaller impact to the business. Even if you turn off the entire markets, it's about 7%. Still significant, but not 60%, right? You want to take a bunch of small markets. Now, in this particular case, let's say we're trying to test Facebook, okay? The key question for you is, what is the impact of incremental contribution of Facebook to your business? I'm spending whatever you're spending, right? At this point, something like $2 million a month or something like that on Facebook. And you want to understand what is the impact of Facebook on your business. Is it driving 1% of my total contribution to new customers or 10% or 20%? What does it actually drive to acquiring new customers for my business? Okay. So how do you do that? You basically, in these markets, you take out Facebook. You basically do what's called a suppression. You go to these campaigns that are running there. Let's call it broad audience campaigns. You take a geo-targeting approach. You basically exclude these markets from those campaigns. So basically, for those markets, you're turning off Facebook support. So there is no Facebook running on those markets. So what you want to understand is how much will revenue drop by? So revenue used to be $1.8 million. How much will it drop by? In this particular classroom example, it dropped by $464,000 or 26%. So this 26% drop in revenue is interpreted as the contribution of Facebook to your business. If you didn't have Facebook, you'd only have 1.3 million. You had Facebook investment, you got 1.8 million. So the difference between these two, which is 464K, now represents the value of Facebook to your business. In this particular case, I'm doing a new customer acquisition sort of example. So how much new customer acquisition revenue is driven by the Facebook investment of 33% of your total budgets, okay? So 33% of your total budgets is yielding 26% of total new customer revenue. Is kind of how to interpret this. Okay. All right. Now, how do you calculate multipliers? We talked about this multiple times. You take this number, you look at, okay, this particular 2.6%, 26% represents 2.6K in a particular time period, whatever the reference time period could be last month, could be last quarter, whatever is meaningful, stable quarter you want to look at. And for the same time period, what is my last click conversions? And last click conversions was 5.6K compared to 2.6K. The multiplier is 48%. Okay. So that's where you go from basically this composition to say, okay, I do a test to understand what is my drop in revenue. So this is your lifted revenue. This is the causal estimate of Facebook's impact on your business. They translate that causal estimate to multiplier by bouncing it against a last click reporting, right? In this particular case, I walked you through Facebook's own ads manager reporting, but you can do the same thing with Google Analytics or UTM reporting or whatever, right? So then now you've now gone from hey, I'm spending some dollars, all I have is last click reporting, to you know what the contribution is and how to translate the contribution to an ongoing multiplier, which you can apply to get daily reporting, daily causal reporting for your Facebook campaigns. Okay.